This is a fictional folktale created for mature viewers. All characters are adults. This channel does not depict or involve minors. The courtyard was packed that night. Neighbors, relatives, even passers-by slowed down to watch the chaos unfold. He stood at the doorway, eyes blazing with cruelty, his voice loud enough for the entire street to hear.
She's barren.
She's
useless. A woman who can't even give me a child has no place in my house.
pointing at her like she was filth. Laughter broke out from some relatives. A few others whispered, but no one stepped forward. She clutched her small bundle of clothes, tears streaming down her face as he kicked her into the muddy street. That night, she walked away, alone, humiliated, and branded a failure. Years passed. He forgot. The city forgot. But 10 years later, something happened that no one was prepared for. Streets were lined with people, cameras flashed, officials gathered. The woman he had mocked, shamed, and thrown out was coming home. And this time, the entire city stood still for her return. This is the story of public cruelty, quiet strength, and a comeback that shook everyone. What do you think happened next? Hello, family. Welcome back. Before we begin, I have a small but heartfelt request. Please subscribe. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Every time you click that button, you're helping us share voices that would otherwise be forgotten and stories that deserve to be heard. And in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, because together, we are not just telling stories. We are keeping hope alive. The courtyard was packed that night. Neighbors leaning over fences, children standing barefoot in puddles, everyone whispering, waiting. The Parkers' house, once the pride of Maplewood Street, had become the center of chaos. Daniel Parker stood at the doorway, tall and proud, his shirt half-buttoned, his face twisted with anger. Behind him, the light from the living room spilled out into the night, cutting through the drizzle that had begun to fall. And in the middle of it all stood Grace Parker, barefoot, trembling, clutching a small bundle of clothes against her chest. "She's barren," Daniel shouted, his voice cracking through the air like thunder. "Useless. A woman who can't even give me a child has no place in my house." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone laughed nervously. Others exchanged glances but said nothing. Grace's lips quivered. "Daniel, please," she whispered, her voice soft but breaking. "Not like this. Don't do this here. Let's talk inside." "There's nothing left to talk about," he barked, cutting her off. "You've had 6 years." "6 useless years, Grace. What have you given me except shame and pity?" Her eyes filled with tears. "You know I've tried. You know I went to every doctor." "And what did it change?" he snapped. "My mother was right. I should have never married a poor girl with nothing but dreams." The crowd murmured. Mrs. Parker, standing proudly by the gate, folded her arms and nodded in satisfaction. Her voice carried easily over the whispering crowd. "She should have known better," she said loudly. "A family needs children. A wife's job is to build, not to curse the home." Grace turned toward her mother-in-law, pleading. "Mother, I loved your son with all my heart. I've done everything I could." "Love doesn't cook food or give heirs," Mrs. Parker snapped coldly. "A good woman knows her place." Grace wiped her tears with trembling fingers. "Daniel, don't let anger make you cruel. I'm still your wife. We can pray. We can try again." "Try?" Daniel scoffed. "You think faith will fix your emptiness?" "Clara never needed prayers. She gave me what you couldn't, a future." The name dropped like a bomb. The crowd stirred again. Someone whispered, "Clara Evans?" Another gasped, "Isn't that his business partner?" Grace's heart pounded. Her voice barely came out. "Clara?" Daniel looked away, jaw tight. "You wouldn't understand." Grace stepped closer. "Daniel, please tell me that's not true." Before he could answer, a woman's voice floated from behind him, smooth, mocking. "Why lie, darling?" The crowd parted as Clara Evans stepped forward. Her red heels clicked against the wet pavement, her perfume heavy in the air. She wore confidence like armor, and when she placed a hand over her slightly rounded belly, everyone knew. "Daniel and I are expecting," Clara said sweetly, her eyes fixed on Grace. "It just happened. Life finds a way, doesn't it?" The world spun. Grace felt like the ground was giving way beneath her feet. Daniel didn't even look at her. He just said coldly, "You should go, Grace. You're no longer part of my life. Grace stared at him, the man she'd loved, the man she'd prayed for every night, and saw nothing familiar left in his eyes. After everything we've been through, she whispered. After all I gave up for you? I stood by you when you had nothing, Daniel. He laughed harshly. And now you have nothing. That makes us even. She took a slow step backward, shaking her head in disbelief. You're cruel. This isn't you, it is now, he said. I'm done pretending. Get out of my house before I make you. A neighbor tried to step forward, old Mr. Dawson from next door again, but Mrs. Parker raised a hand sharply. Stay out of this, sir. This is a family matter. Grace's voice cracked. Please, Daniel, don't do this. Not here. Not like this. But Daniel had already opened the door wider, pointing toward the dark street. Go. Take your rags and go before I lose my temper. The drizzle turned to rain. Water streamed down the steps, mixing with her tears. Grace looked around. Faces she'd known for years, faces that had smiled at her, eaten her food, shared her home. None of them moved. Some looked away, others whispered, poor thing. She should have given him a child. Clara's baby will bring him luck. Grace's chest ached as if it might burst. She bent slowly, picked up her small bag, just a few clothes, her wedding photo, and the Bible her mother had given her, and turned toward the street. As she walked past Daniel, he muttered under his breath, Don't come back. She paused just long enough to whisper, One day, Daniel, you'll remember this moment. He didn't respond. The door slammed behind her, echoing down the street. The rain poured harder now, soaking her dress. Her shoes sank into the mud as thunder rolled across the sky. She had nowhere to go, no money, no friends, no family close by. She walked aimlessly, past dim streetlights and shuttered stores, until she reached the small bridge at the edge of town. She stopped there, clutching her wet bundle to her chest, staring at her reflection in the dark water below. For the first time, she saw herself clearly, not as a wife, not as someone's burden, just a woman stripped of everything. Barren, she whispered bitterly, repeating the word that had been hurled at her. Useless, worthless lightning flashed, and in that flash, she saw her own eyes, red but fierce. A spark of something inside her refused to die. She dropped to her knees, rain beating against her face, and whispered into the storm, If this is how my story ends, let it end clean. But if there's still a reason for me to live, show me the way. The sound of thunder answered her. Or maybe it was her own heart breaking open and beginning again. The next morning, Daniel Parker woke up to headlines, not in the papers, but in whispers. The story of what he'd done had spread across town. People talked, as they always did. Some said he'd gone too far. Others said Grace deserved it, but either way, Daniel didn't care. He sat at the breakfast table with Clara, who now occupied Grace's seat, and smiled as if nothing had happened. Mrs. Parker poured tea, smug and satisfied. You did the right thing, my son. That girl was a curse. Now your real life begins. Daniel nodded, though something in his chest felt off. A flicker of guilt he quickly buried. Clara touched his hand and said, Don't think about her. We'll give this family the air it deserves. He smiled faintly. Yes, the future looks good now, but outside, the rain didn't stop. And somewhere miles away, Grace Parker kept walking. She found a small bus stop at dawn, her hair dripping, her eyes swollen from crying. The driver looked at her with pity as she stepped in. Where to, ma'am? He asked. She stared out the window, voice barely audible. Anywhere that's not here. The bus moved. Her hometown faded behind her, replaced by fields, hills, and miles of road. The sun finally broke through the clouds, lighting her face, tired, bruised, but alive. Inside her chest, pain and pride fought for space. She didn't know where she was going or how she'd survive. But deep down, something had shifted. She wasn't the same woman who had begged to be loved. She wasn't the same woman who let others decide her worth. She was Grace Parker. And though she didn't know it yet, the world had just met the beginning of her rebirth. The rain had stopped by morning, but Grace Parker kept walking. She didn't know where the road led. She only knew she couldn't go back. Every step felt heavy, but stopping felt worse. Her clothes clung to her skin, and her shoes were caked in mud. She had no money left, no food, and nowhere to sleep. For the first few nights, she stayed in small bus terminals, using her bag as a pillow. She skipped meals, drank water from public fountains, and prayed quietly under her breath, even when she wasn't sure who was listening. Days turned into weeks. She took small jobs wherever she could, washing dishes in a diner, cleaning rooms in cheap motels, folding laundry in strangers' homes. No one asked about her past, and she didn't offer it. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw someone else. A woman broken, yes, but still breathing. Sometimes she thought about Daniel. His face, his words, the way the door slammed that night. Each time her heart clenched, but the pain slowly hardened into silence. One evening, after finishing her shift at a factory, Grace walked back through the busy street, dizzy from hunger. Her vision blurred. The noise of traffic faded into a low hum. She tried to hold onto a lamppost, but missed and fell to the ground. The world went black. When she woke, everything smelled of antiseptic and soap. A soft voice said, "Easy now. Don't move too fast." Grace blinked, her eyes adjusting to the bright light. A man in a white coat stood beside her, checking her pulse. He had kind eyes, and the kind that didn't stare through you but looked at you. Where am I?" she whispered. "You're in St. Mercy Clinic," the man said with a gentle smile. "You fainted outside our gate last night. Lucky for you, one of the nurses saw you." Grace looked around. The room was simple. White walls, a curtain, a small window letting in the morning light. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." He chuckled lightly. "Trouble? You nearly passed out on my doorstep. I think that qualifies as a rescue, not trouble." She smiled faintly. "Thank you, Doctor." "Dr. Jonathan Miles," he said. "And you are?" "Grace," she replied after a pause. "Grace Parker." He nodded. "Well, Grace Parker, it seems you haven't eaten properly in days. Your blood sugar was low, and you're severely exhausted. You need rest." Grace hesitated. "I can't pay for treatment." Dr. Miles waved his hand. "Don't worry about that. This clinic isn't about money. We help people who have nowhere else to go." For the first time in months, Grace felt tears that didn't burn. "Thank you, doctor." "You don't even know me." He smiled. "Sometimes knowing someone's pain is enough." Grace stayed for a few days, helping around the clinic once she regained her strength. She cleaned the waiting room, folded sheets, and washed instruments. The nurses liked her instantly. Dr. Miles noticed how quickly she learned things. She listened carefully, worked hard, and never complained. One afternoon, he found her organizing patient files alphabetically. He raised an eyebrow. "You know how to do that?" Grace shrugged shyly. "I used to help Daniel, my husband, with paperwork for his business." Old habit. Dr. Miles didn't press further, but he saw something in her, intelligence wrapped in humility. "You're sharp," he said. "How would you feel about working here part-time?" "We could use someone like you." Grace looked surprised. "You'd hire me?" "I'd be foolish not to," he said warmly. And so it began. Months passed. Grace became part of the clinic's heart. She helped organize schedules, talked to patients, and handled the small details everyone else forgot. Dr. Miles admired how she balanced gentleness with order. One evening after closing, he found her writing notes at the front desk. "Still working?" he asked. She looked up and smiled. "Just making sure tomorrow's supplies are counted." "You remind me of myself 20 years ago," he said. "I used to stay up all night just to make things run smoother." Grace laughed softly. "You still do," he smiled. "Touché." They shared an easy silence. Then Dr. Miles said quietly, "Grace, I don't know what you've been through, but you're stronger than you realize." She looked down. "I'm not sure about that. Sometimes I still feel lost." "That's normal," he said gently. "Loss leaves a hole, but strength grows around it." Years passed. The clinic grew. New rooms, more patients, more staff. Grace handled the management side effortlessly. She took night classes in administration and healthcare management, encouraged by Dr. Miles. The townspeople began calling her Miss Collins, a name she'd started using to leave her old life behind. Then, one afternoon during a staff health check, Dr. Miles insisted she run a full test. It's routine, he said. You've been skipping meals again. Grace laughed. You sound like a father. He smiled. I'll take that as a compliment. When the test results came back, Dr. Miles frowned at the file, puzzled. What is it? Grace asked. Grace. He hesitated. You're perfectly healthy. More than that, there's no sign of infertility. Not now, not ever. Has anyone ever told you you couldn't have children? Grace froze. Yes, she whispered. My husband did. Years ago, Dr. Miles looked at her seriously. He was wrong. The words sank deep. For a moment, the room went silent. Her hands trembled. So, it was never me? She whispered. He shook his head. No. You're fine, Grace. In fact, you could have children. Tears filled her eyes. He destroyed me to protect his pride, she said, voice cracking. He called me Barren, threw me out, and all this time it was him. Dr. Miles reached out gently, his voice calm. You don't have to let that define you anymore. Grace nodded slowly. No, doctor. I won't waste another tear on him. From that day, something shifted in her. Grace threw herself into her work with a new purpose. Not to prove Daniel wrong, but to prove herself right. Dr. Miles watched her grow from a wounded woman into a force of quiet leadership. Together, they built a foundation of trust and kindness. Patients who couldn't afford care found hope at their clinic. Sometimes, when they worked late, Grace would bring coffee, and they'd sit by the window watching the city lights. You've changed this place, he told her once. You gave me the chance, she replied. He shook his head. You gave it meaning. One evening, after years of working side by side, Dr. Miles took her on a walk by the garden behind the clinic. The sun was setting, painting the sky in gold and pink. Grace, he began softly, you've rebuilt your life in ways most people can't imagine. You've helped so many. But I need to ask something personal. She turned to him curious. What is it? He smiled nervously. You deserve peace, Grace, and I'd be honored to give you a home. Not as a savior, but as a man who sees your worth. Grace's heart skipped. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then she whispered, Are you sure, Jonathan? I have a past. I'm not perfect. He took her hands. That past made you who you are. I don't want perfect. I want real tears welled in her eyes. Not from pain this time, but from gratitude. Yes, she said softly, I'd like that very much. They married quietly a few months later. No grand ceremony, just close friends, the clinic staff, and laughter that felt like healing. A year later, Grace gave birth to a healthy baby boy. 2 years after that, a baby girl. When she held them in her arms, she cried. Tears of joy, of release, of victory. Dr. Miles stood beside her, smiling proudly. You see? Life always finds a way. Grace kissed her newborn's forehead. Yes, she whispered. It always does. Together, they expanded the clinic into the Miles Collins Medical Foundation. Dr. Miles handled the medical side while Grace ran operations and community outreach. Her leadership drew attention from donors and city officials. Within a few years, they opened branches across the region. Grace, now Grace M. Collins, became a respected philanthropist and businesswoman. But even as she smiled for cameras and spoke at charity events, she never forgot the night she was thrown into the rain. When she saw struggling women, she offered them jobs. When she met single mothers, she gave them free medical care. She built programs for widows, for women who'd been told they were less than. Her pain had become her purpose. Late at night, when everyone was asleep, she sometimes stood by the window, watching the city lights. She'd whisper to herself, You were wrong, Daniel. I was never barren, only planted in the wrong soil. And with that, she'd smile, not in anger, but in peace. The morning sun hit the glass walls of Parker Industries, but inside it was anything but bright. Daniel Parker sat in his office, staring at a pile of reports that made his stomach twist. Numbers didn't lie, and these numbers screamed trouble. Sales were dropping. Contracts were being canceled. Whispers about faulty equipment and unethical deals had begun spreading through the business community. He slammed his pen down. Who leaked this nonsense? His assistant, nervous and pale, stammered, Says, Sir, it's not nonsense. The hospitals reported the devices malfunctioned. 2 patients were injured. Daniel cut him off. Enough! Get out! The assistant bolted. Daniel leaned back, rubbing his temples. He had built this company from nothing, or at least that's what he told himself. The truth was, much of his rise had come from charm, shortcuts, and Clara's money. And now it was all slipping through his fingers. At home, things weren't better. Clara, his glamorous wife, paced the living room in a silk robe, holding her phone close to her ear. "Yes, baby, I'll call you later," she said in a low voice, smiling into the phone. When she turned around, Daniel was standing by the door, his face hard. "Who was that?" he asked coldly. She smirked. "A friend." "Don't start, Daniel. I'm not one of your employees." He stepped closer. "Don't lie to me, Clara." She laughed, her tone sharp. "Oh, please. You're one to talk about lies. You built your empire on them." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You better watch your mouth." Clara crossed her arms. "Or what? You'll throw me out like you did Grace?" The words hit him like a slap. "Don't you dare say her name," he growled. Clara's lips curved into a cruel smile. "Funny how you still flinch when you hear it. Maybe because deep down, you know you threw away the only woman who actually loved you." Daniel's hand twitched. He turned away instead of replying. Behind him, Clara rolled her eyes and walked upstairs, muttering, "Pathetic." He sank into a chair, gripping his head. Everything was collapsing. His marriage, his company, his peace. And he didn't even know the worst part yet. 2 weeks later, the scandal exploded. Local news ran the headline, "Parker Industries accused of supplying fake medical equipment." The government launched an official investigation. The leading investigative partner? The Miles Collins Foundation. Daniel's heart sank when he heard the name. He didn't know the people behind it, only that they were powerful, and that without their approval, he'd be finished. He told his lawyer, "Get me a meeting with their board." "I don't care how." When the day came, Daniel wore his best suit. He walked into the gleaming glass building of the Miles Collins Foundation with a fake smile and a pounding heart. The boardroom was huge, modern, quiet, intimidating. At the far end of the long table sat a few directors and a man named Dr. Jonathan Miles, calm and dignified. Beside him sat a woman whose face Daniel couldn't see. She wore a black mask and sat behind tinted glass. "Mr. Parker," Dr. Miles greeted. "Thank you for coming." Daniel nodded stiffly. "Thank you for seeing me. I'm here to clear my company's name. These allegations are exaggerated." Dr. Miles looked at him steadily. "We're not here to judge, Mr. Parker. We're here to verify." Daniel forced a smile. "I can assure you, I've always done honest business." The masked woman spoke then, her voice soft, calm, but unmistakably firm. "Honesty is a heavy word, Mr. Parker. It's not one you wear easily." Daniel froze. There was something about her voice, familiar, steady, haunting. He blinked. "Have we met before?" She didn't answer. Dr. Miles continued. "We'll review your records and the hospital's reports. If fraud is confirmed, we'll have to recommend prosecution." Daniel's palms grew sweaty. "Please, doctor, I'm begging you. My company, my family depends on this." The masked woman leaned forward slightly. "Family," she repeated quietly. Interesting choice of word. Daniel frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," she said. "Just people who use that word sometimes forget what it truly stands for." Her tone was calm, but every syllable cut through him. He felt something tighten in his chest. Guilt, or maybe memory. "I swear I'll make it right," he said, his voice trembling. "Just give me time." Dr. Miles nodded once. "We'll be in touch." As Daniel walked out, he turned one last time, but the glass between him and the masked woman reflected only his own face. Behind that glass, Grace watched him go. Silent, steady, composed. Her fingers trembled slightly under the table. It had been 10 years since she'd seen him. 10 long years. Dr. Miles reached over and gently placed his hand over hers. "You did well," he whispered. Grace took a deep breath. "It's strange. I thought I'd feel anger, but all I feel is peace." He smiled softly. "That's what healing looks like." She nodded. "Still, he deserves to face what he built." "And he will," Dr. Miles said. "Truth always finds its way home." Meanwhile, back at Daniel's mansion, chaos had moved in for good. Clara's affair wasn't a rumor anymore. It was a headline. The tabloids caught her on camera with another man, a young real estate investor. Daniel stormed into the living room, throwing the newspaper at her. "You made a fool of me." Clara didn't even flinch. "Relax, Daniel. Everyone already knows what kind of man you are. I just followed your lead." "You ungrateful," he started, but she cut him off. "Don't yell at me," she snapped. "If it weren't for my money, you'd still be broke. You think anyone respects you? You're finished." He glared at her, his hands shaking. "Get out." Clara laughed coldly. "Gladly. But I'm taking what's mine." She walked out, slamming the door. The sound echoed through the empty house. Daniel dropped into a chair, head in his hands. He had nothing left but debts, lawsuits, and shame. Then came another blow. His son, 16 now, came to him holding a letter. "Dad," the boy said hesitantly, "Mom told me something." "Is it true?" Daniel looked up. "What are you talking about?" "That you're not my father." The room went still. Daniel's eyes widened. "What?" The boy stepped back. "She said the man she's been seeing, he's my real dad." Daniel's heart sank. "That's not true." "She's lying." But even as he said it, he saw the boy's face. The truth was written there. The resemblance wasn't his. "Get out," Daniel said weakly. "Just go." The boy left without another word. For the first time in years, Daniel Parker cried. A month later, an ambulance pulled up in front of a small house on Oak Street. Inside lay Mrs. Parker, frail, pale, barely conscious. The doctor said she needed immediate surgery or she wouldn't survive. Daniel had no money left. The family home was mortgaged. The only hospital willing to take her under a charity program? The Miles Collins Medical Foundation. Daniel signed the papers with shaking hands. "Thank you," he whispered to the nurse. When Mrs. Parker was wheeled into the ward, she was too weak to open her eyes. But Grace knew. She had seen the name on the file. Margaret Parker, age 68. That night, Grace stood outside the hospital room, wearing her white coat and a mask. Dr. Miles approached quietly. "You don't have to do this tonight," he said gently. She shook her head. "Yes, I do." "It's time." Inside the room, machines beeped softly. Mrs. Parker's hands looked small now, almost childlike. Her hair had turned completely gray. Grace stepped closer. Her heart pounded, but her voice stayed calm. "Good evening, Mrs. Parker." The old woman opened her eyes weakly. Who are you?" Grace reached up and slowly removed her mask. Mrs. Parker blinked, her mouth trembling. "Grace?" she whispered. Grace smiled softly. "Yes, ma'am." "It's me," Mrs. Parker gasped, tears filling her eyes. "You're alive." "I just took a different road," Grace said quietly. The old woman's hand shook as she reached out. "Child, Shh," Grace said gently, taking her hand. "Don't speak. You need your strength." Tears rolled down Mrs. Parker's face. "I wronged you, Grace. I said terrible things. I let him hurt you. I thought I was protecting my son, but I destroyed you instead." Grace squeezed her hand. "It's all in the past now." "No," Mrs. Parker whispered. "You must hate me." Grace shook her head. "Hate only poisons the heart. I forgave you a long time ago." The old woman sobbed quietly. "You're a better woman than I ever was." Grace smiled faintly. "Maybe I just learned the hard way." The next morning, news spread through Maplewood like wildfire. Grace Parker, the woman Daniel threw out 10 years ago, was alive, wealthy, and leading the Miles Collins Foundation. Neighbors who once mocked her now whispered her name with awe. Daniel read the headlines in stunned silence, his hands trembling. He whispered to himself, "Grace, you're alive." And for the first time, he felt true fear, not of losing money or power, but of facing the truth he had buried beneath his pride. The air in Maplewood felt different that morning. It carried excitement, whispers, and something like pride. The city that once laughed at Grace Parker was now preparing for her arrival. Banners fluttered from streetlights. "Welcome, Grace M. Collins, Humanitarian of the Year." The mayor's office was buzzing, reporters crowded sidewalks, and even the children had been given the day off school. For the first time in 10 years, the city would stand still. For her. Grace sat quietly in the back of the limousine, her hands resting on her lap. The car glided through the familiar streets of Maplewood, the same streets where she'd once walked barefoot in the rain, clutching a torn bag in her pride. Now the sidewalks were lined with people waving flags and holding signs that read, "We love you, Grace Collins." Her daughter leaned toward the window, eyes wide. "Mom, are all these people here for you?" Grace smiled gently. "For us, sweetheart. For what love can build when hate tries to destroy it." Dr. Miles, seated beside her, reached over and took her hand. "You ready?" She nodded slowly. "I've been ready for 10 years. As the car stopped in front of the Grand City Hall, camera flashes exploded. Grace stepped out in a flowing ivory dress. Simple, elegant, dignified. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her posture calm. Beside her, Dr. Miles looked every inch the proud husband. Their 2 children, holding small bouquets, waved shyly at the crowd. The mayor, a round man with an overly bright smile, hurried forward. "Mrs. Collins, what an honor to have you in Maplewood again." Grace shook his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's good to be back." People cheered. Some clapped until their palms hurt. Others just stared in quiet disbelief. They remembered her. Oh, they remembered the night she was cast out. The cries, the whispers, the cruelty. And now they watched her rise, graceful, calm, untouchable. Inside the city hall, the gala glittered with chandeliers and expensive suits. Politicians, business owners, journalists, everyone who once ignored her now wanted to be near her. A large banner read, "Honoring Grace M. Collins for changing lives through compassion." As Grace walked up to the stage, the applause was deafening. She waited a few seconds before speaking, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you, Maplewood," she began. "It's been a long time since I've stood here, in this city that raised me, broke me, and taught me what strength truly means." The room grew quiet. Cameras clicked softly. 10 years ago," she continued, her eyes scanning the crowd, "I was called Barren, useless, a woman without worth. I was thrown out of my home, humiliated publicly, for something I didn't even understand." Her voice trembled for a moment, but not from weakness. It was the weight of memory, the echo of every cruel word she had endured. "But today," she said, her tone rising, "I stand here as a mother, a wife, and a woman blessed to serve thousands through the same pain that once broke me." The audience erupted in applause. Cameras flashed wildly. Even those who had never met her wiped tears from their eyes. Dr. Miles smiled from the front row, their children clapping proudly beside him. Grace lifted a hand, signaling for silence. "Thank you, but before I end, there's one truth I must share. Because silence, I've learned, can sometimes protect the wrong people." The hall went still. "After I was cast out," Grace said, her eyes sharp now, "I spent years believing I was barren. But later, medical records proved what I never knew then. The problem was never me." The words landed like thunder. Reporters gasped. People turned in their seats. And from the corner of the hall, a man froze. Daniel Parker. He stood in the back, unnoticed until now, his once proud face pale and drawn. His hair was graying, his suit worn. The mighty businessman who had mocked her was now just another face in the crowd, broken and small. Grace's gaze met his for a fraction of a second. He looked away, but it was too late. Cameras had already found him. Whispers rippled across the hall. "That's her ex-husband. Is that Daniel Parker? He said she was barren." Reporters swarmed toward him, microphones flashing like fireflies. Grace didn't flinch. She simply said, "The truth has no expiry date. It may sleep, but it never dies." Her words echoed through the hall. Daniel tried to leave, but the press blocked his way. Questions flew at him. "Mr. Parker, do you have a statement? Did you know you were infertile? Do you regret what you did to your wife?" He stumbled, sweating, eyes darting around desperately. Clara stood near the exit, watching with disgust. She turned her back and walked away without a word. For the first time, Daniel understood what it felt like to be humiliated. Not privately, but publicly, as Grace once was. Grace looked out over the crowd one last time, and smiled faintly. I share this not for revenge, but as a reminder, cruelty may echo for a moment, but dignity echoes forever. The hall burst into applause again, loud, proud, unstoppable. Grace stepped down from the stage, greeted by well-wishers and flashing lights. But she wasn't thinking about fame or applause. She was thinking about peace. Outside, the night air was cool. The crowd had spilled into the streets cheering her name. The mayor had arranged for a procession, a short walk through the old neighborhood before the charity dinner began. Grace hesitated. Through Maplewood Lane? She asked quietly. Dr. Miles nodded. Yes, they said it would mean a lot to people. That's where it all began, right? Grace smiled softly. That's where it all began. As they stepped onto the street, memories hit her like waves. The narrow houses, the old bakery on the corner, the same cobblestones where she'd once fallen in the rain. But this time, the street wasn't laughing. It was clapping. Neighbors who once turned away now leaned out of windows waving white scarves. Children threw flowers. Even the elderly who once gossiped about her stood wiping their eyes. At the end of the street, a man waited. Daniel. He looked smaller than she remembered. His shoulders slumped, his face tired. He stepped forward slowly as she approached, his voice shaking. Grace, he said. She stopped a few feet away, her husband and children standing quietly behind her. Grace, please, Daniel continued, falling to his knees right there on the wet pavement. I'm sorry. I've lost everything. My wife, my company, my son, they're all gone. I was blind, cruel, foolish people watch, silent. Even the cameras lowered. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, he said, his voice breaking, but I had to say it. You didn't deserve what I did to you. I destroyed you, and you became everything I'm not. Grace looked at him for a long moment. There was no anger in her eyes, only calm, distant sadness. I forgave you long ago, Daniel, she said quietly. He looked up, shocked. You did? Yes, she said, because forgiveness isn't for you. It's for me. I forgave you the day I decided to live again. But forgiveness doesn't erase truth. Daniel's head dropped. He whispered, I wish I could undo it. Grace shook her head. You can't. None of us can change the past, but we can learn from it. That's what I did. You should try too. She turned to leave but paused. Daniel, she said softly without looking back, you once told me I had no place in your house. Funny how the world made a bigger one for me. He closed his eyes, tears sliding down his cheeks. Grace took Dr. Miles's hand, her children beside her. Together they walked down Maplewood Lane, the same path she'd taken a decade ago, but this time lined with roses and applause instead of laughter and mud. The cameras followed, capturing every second. Her ivory dress glowed under the streetlights like a symbol, not of revenge, but of resurrection. By the time they reached the end of the street, the crowd had fallen silent, not from pity, but from awe. Grace stopped, turned, and looked back at the people who once called her names. Her voice carried through the night. I came back to say this. Never measure a person by their pain. Sometimes that's where their power begins. The audience stood still, her words sinking deep. Then one by one, they began to clap again, slowly, then louder, until the sound filled the whole city. Grace smiled through her tears. She looked at Dr. Miles, who nodded proudly, and at her children, who held her hands tightly. Together they walked toward the car waiting at the corner, leaving behind the street that once broke her, now reborn with her name. Cruelty may echo for a moment, but dignity echoes forever. Truth has no expiry date, and humility costs nothing. Never measure a person by their pain. Sometimes that's where their power begins.